Okay, so let's go to the last model essentially, and let me explain this model through an actual case. So this actual case is the case of the antitrust case against Microsoft in the United States in the early 2000s that actually Malta writes on as well. So it's actually good to have a look actually also at his description of that case. So the idea of this case was it was revolving around browsers for the internet. So particularly in that era, in 1990s mostly, in the browser industry, in the internet industry, the fight actually between the two largest companies in that case was referred to as the browser wars, and later on as the first browser wars, because if you perhaps you know that, of course, today actually it's Google which dominates the browser industry. So there was a second browser war, which ultimately was resolved to the advantage of Google, who's now captured the largest share of the browser industry. But that was only later on, so Google was not yet in the picture at this point. But in the 1990s, there were two companies that were at war for being the largest internet browsing provider. The first one was Microsoft. So Microsoft had a product which was then called the Internet Explorer on the left-hand side, this logo. And its rival in this industry was called Netscape. So the right-hand side here is Netscape. So we had Microsoft and Netscape in competition over browsers. So the Netscape Navigator was the browser owned by Netscape, and again the Internet Explorer was Microsoft's product for browsing the internet. And what Microsoft wanted to do, or tried to do, at least that's what the US government argued, they tried to get Netscape to leave this market. And how did they do this? Well, by writing exclusive or quasi-exclusive contracts, or contracts which, at least for computer companies, hardware manufacturers, and also internet portals like Yahoo or America Online, they try to make it very attractive to only offer, or to offer at least for a large share, computers with Internet Explorer installed upon them. So they wanted to make sure that Microsoft's Internet Explorer would gain market share over Netscape's Navigator. And well, why did they want to do this? Well, in the first place, of course, to keep or to push Netscape out of that market for browsing. But of course, there was a deeper reason for this. And if you read, actually, so it's a good thing to do that, the paper by Whinston over here, so the 2004 paper, which basically describes this case and also describes some of the underlying economic theories, so some of the theories that we have been discussing today, and also some of the theories that we'll discuss now and next week, for what was underlying the anti-competitive concerns about the behavior of Microsoft. So the deeper reason of why Microsoft might have wanted to push Netscape, and ultimately did succeed actually in pushing Netscape out of this market, was that Microsoft was worried that Netscape might grow not only to take over this browser market, but in the end to take over the whole operating system market, so that they might also actually endanger the existing monopoly of Windows as an operating system, by providing a platform basically for entering the market for operating systems through their Netscape Navigator. So that was the claimed interest, at least, the alleged interest that Microsoft had for pushing Netscape from this market. So the question is, this model that we have looked at before, this story of Segal and Whinston and Rasmussen, Ramsey and Wiley, is that valid in this to describe this case? And well, someone might wonder, of course, it's the skill economies that we saw there. So you need multiple buyers basically to sign up to your product, and if you do so, then your rival might not have sufficient scale to actually be active in this market. And yes, that kind of skill economies do exist in this market, and in particular, those scale economies consist of network costs. So in this market, you would need a large base of consumers, a large user base, because you're reliant on other parties to write software that can run well on your browser. So if you only have one client, well, then nobody's going to write a special website for that one to run on that other type of on your type of browser, because they can serve almost the whole market already by using the incumbent browser. So there would be many buyers here, and the question is, can Microsoft indeed play them against each other, like we saw is sort of underlying the story or the model that we looked at in the G.T.J. case. So to this extent, yes, this sector actually does meet the description to some extent of the G.T.J. story. But there's a problem there, because Netscape was already active in this market. So this Netscape Navigator already existed. So if you remember in the G.T.J. model, we would have the incumbent making an offer to the buyers, who might then somehow accept this offer, while this new entrant is not yet there, but at some point might enter this market and find out, oh, well, no point in sinking lots of costs, because I cannot get all these signed up buyers to actually to take my product, or they have been taken away from the market basically. In the current case, actually, Netscape was there. It was already active in this market. So you might wonder, well, if if the Internet Explorer or Windows in this, Microsoft in this case, made this offer to these buyers, why didn't Netscape at that same point already say, oh, well, if they make this offer for exclusivity, I can actually make a better offer, so don't sign this contract because you're better off with me. So that's a question that you need to address. It's not completely in accordance with this model, which assumed basically that Netscape is still waiting by the sidelines and not yet involved in these negotiations. So in order to understand better why exclusion might also occur, even though this entrant, this other market player, is already present in this market and might actively compete with the incumbent in making attractive offers for either exclusivity or non-exclusivity to this buyer, so might pay actually these buyers not to sign such an exclusivity contract ex ante. So what can we do? So BernheimWhinston actually give a model which actually does have this as a feature. So this model supposes that this entrant is already on the market. This rival supplier is there to make this better offer. And there is just one buyer who is there currently. So let's call that buyer B1. So this M, let's say Microsoft, and E, let's say Netscape, they will compete to serve B1 with their respective browsers. And let's assume, of course, that B1 benefits from this competition, right? So the buyers benefit from there being a lot of competition among these different browsers. So in particular, there is additional gains, addition of consumer surplus for this buyer if they enjoy competition, and actually this additional consumer surplus outweighs the total monopoly profits that this incumbent Microsoft could make if they manage to persuade this buyer to actually sign an exclusivity contract. So in that case, of course, the Chicago critique is operating, because M can in no way give enough money to this buyer B1 to persuade this buyer to enjoy this, to sign this exclusivity arrangement, because the max that M will be willing to pay is the profit it can make by 1M, but actually the max that B1 can enjoy from not signing this delta CS, that's bigger than that. And again, this is depicted in this picture. So again, the extra consumer surplus is the blue area plus the red area. That's what the buyer gains from having competition. The total surplus that the incumbent has to offer for getting exclusivity is just its profits, which is the blue area here, which clearly is smaller than that. So this happens if in particular if this entrant, so let's assume that this entrant indeed is more efficient, so it can actually produce at a slightly lower cost or perhaps at a higher quality than the incumbent can. So in this case indeed the monopoly profits plus the green area here, the consumer surplus in exclusivity, so on the monopoly, is smaller than the total green consumer surplus if the rival, the more efficient rival, enters. Okay, so now we have to add something to this to circumvent again this Chicago critique, otherwise there's no traction to this claim that there's anti-competitive exclusion. And what Bernheim thought up in their model is, well, suppose there's actually a second market here. A second market consisting of buyers, let's call them B2, who might be other people or the same people but sometime in the future, and they just don't realize this yet. And in this second market, B2, M and E will at some point in the future compete if they are both present in the market. So that, in the current case, that would be illustrated by this Netscape company to grow if it gets sufficient market share in the current market. It would grow to become a substitute for Windows rather than just for the Internet Explorer browser. So there's this second market, the market for operating systems, in which E, the entrant, would also become a rival for the incumbent. Now, in order to get there, let's assume that this Netscape entrant, the E, needs to make some investments. So perhaps the incumbent already has this, but the entrant still needs to invest F to enter that and also the second market. And let's assume that for this entrant to be profitable in those markets, it needs both buyers in the end to sell to. So both B1 and B2, so for current system B1 and for the future system B2, will have to be won over in order to actually make this investment worthwhile. So you can see this in this equation over here. Just entering, so sinking this cost F to supply these second period, these future consumers, well, the total profits that you get in the future in competition with the incumbent will not be enough, will not be sufficient to win back your sunk costs of making this effort. But joined with the profits that you make today by already selling to the original buyers B1 in the browser market in our example, if you add those two profits up, well, that will be sufficient to also cover the costs of entering these markets. And let's assume as well that indeed this entrant is the more efficient player in the end. So if E manages to enter, particularly if M, Windows in this case, doesn't sign up those buyers and foreclose access, if E enters, then the monopolist, current monopolist, will actually lose its customers and actually make zero profits. So is entry efficient? Well, it depends, of course, how large these costs are, etc. So as long as indeed the total profits that this entrant can make, which is the profits can make both today and in the future market, minus the costs, the fixed costs of entry, F, plus indeed the total welfare that consumers gain from entry by this entrant firm, so the delta CS1 for the consumers of today for B1, but also delta CS2 because also tomorrow's consumers B2, they will benefit from this additional competition. If all that welfare gains are larger than the total welfare of the monopolist, which is the profits of the monopolist in those two markets, well, then obviously it's going to be efficient for this entry to occur. In other words, we would like entry to occur here. So the entrant then will make lots of profits, and consumers will also enjoy this additional surplus, which is going to be bigger than the rents here of this monopolist. So now the question again is, of course, can M still persuade this buyer today, B1, to accept such an exclusive contract? So a contract which says you shall only buy from me, and you shall not do business with this entrant. So if, of course, the monopolist would succeed in doing this, well, then it's going to foreclose access, and the entrant has no business coming into this market because it can never gain back its entry cost F. But now there's, of course, the catch here, because the entrant E is sitting there as well nearby and say, well, I see M making this offer to you, B1, but I can actually make you a better offer, an offer you cannot refuse. So E can make a counter offer here. So the question is, in the presence of E, who can actually make a potentially better offer, a counter offer? Is there still scope for M to actually persuade B1 to accept such an exclusive contract, which leads apparently to lower welfare, because no entry occurs if M indeed succeeds in foreclosing access to the entrant. Total welfare is going to be lower because it's given by the right hand side. So what's going to happen? Well, there's this bidding competition, if you wish. These two companies, both M and E, they are competing for signing up B1. So either B1 takes up this offer for this exclusive contract from M, or it takes up the counter offer, a very attractive counter offer from E, to buy from E. So what does this bidding competition look like? Well, both M and E are going to make, have to consider what's the best offer that I can make to B1. So what's the best offer that the entrant can make? Well, the most that the entrant will be able to make is all the profits it stands to gain from entering. So if it can enter in B1 in the first period to supply and buy in B1, then it will also be active. It will be possible to be active in market 2, in the future market. Serving B2, it will sink these costs and it will make a positive profit. And in the end, it will be willing to pay as much as maximally these profits to win over B1 to actually buy their product. So as long as E can make any offer up to, well, the value of the total profits that E can make, it will be able to enter this market. So what's the best offer that M can make? Well, it can at most make the total monopoly profits that it will stand to gain if it can keep E out of the market. Because if E remains out of the market, well, pi 1M plus pi 2M will be the sum of the profits that the monopolist can then gain from B1. So it will be willing to pay B1 to sign this exclusive contract at most by paying B1 off by the profits that it can gain. If the monopolist does not get B1 to accept this offer, it will lose everything, because E will then enter and the incumbent monopolist M, will not sell anything. Of course, we also have to take into account that B1 knows that if E enters, it will not only get that monetary amount from either the monopoly or the entrant, but it will also enjoy the fiercer competition over its supply of browser, because it will then be a competitive market with both M and E vying basically to supply their respective browsers. So it will also get this additional surplus that B1 will get through competition, delta C as well. So who is going to win this competition, right? This bidding competition. So is it M who is going to be able to sort of make B1 happier by accepting his offer, or will it be E who will be sort of the firm who will be able to persuade the buyer not to sign such an exclusive offer in exchange for very attractive supply agreements? Well, remember again, I'm just rewriting here, or just reiterating here, when is entry efficient? Well, as long as total surplus that will be captured by the maximum surplus that will be captured by this entrant firm, plus the change in consumer surplus in both markets, will be bigger than the total surplus that the monopolist will be able to gather if no entry occurs, because exclusive agreement has been reached. So as long as this is the case, of course, entry is going to be efficient. But what was the condition on which M is going to win the fight for getting exclusivity? Well, it needs to offer more to B1 than E can. So what's could M offer? Well, it could offer pi 1M plus pi 2M. Its total profit is the maximum bid that M can make to B1 in order to sign this exclusive agreement. Whereas what can E offer? Well, it can offer at most its profits, these first three terms here, is the profits that they can make. And it also knows that, well, B1 will be better off anyway if I enter, because then it will benefit from this more attractive, more competitive situation in its browser market, so it will earn an additional delta CS1. So as long as these profits are larger than the total of these profits and this welfare contribution for consumers, it will be M who will be able to offer a larger bag of money, if you wish, to persuade B1 to sign this contract. So can M use an exclusive offer to block entry? Well, as long as this condition works, yes, they can. But isn't this condition doesn't that fly in the face of the fact that entry is efficient? Well, if you compare these two, there's one thing that's missing in the second one. And what's missing here is this delta CS2. So if it's this delta CS2, so the additional surplus that the future buyers will have from the additional competition in the future market for the operating system, in particular in this example, as long as that's large enough to basically tip the balance from this inequality essentially to that inequality, if that's going to be sufficiently important in this welfare contribution, then indeed we might have that the total profits that B1 can make, that M can make under exclusivity is sufficient actually to keep E from making a counter offer which is so attractive that it can win over B1. So the fact that these two conditions are not aligned, and the difference again being the delta CS2, allows for the possibility that indeed M can make an offer which is so attractive to B1 that B1 is willing to actually give up entry by signing the exclusivity contract and getting this large bag of money instead, and then after that fact being exposed to monopoly behavior by the monopolist. Who is going to pay for this? Well, of course, B2. B2's surplus, its benefit from having extra competition in this future market, that's not taken into account in this condition. So the exclusionary contract that B1 is willing to sign creates an enormous downside or an external effect on B2. So B2 is going to lose if B1 is going to sign this exclusive contract. Well, B2, these future customers, they are not there. They are not yet sitting on this negotiation table. They will pop up at the future time when this new operating system becomes available. So neither M nor B1 nor E is going to internalize this consumer surplus that B2 stands to gain. So the fact that B2 future consumers are not participating, cannot make a counter offer here to keep B1 from signing this contract, that's going to tip the balance here, or that might tip the balance here. So in conclusion, we can see here that though entry is efficient, so though the Chicago critique might hold, what's going to make foreclosure and equilibrium nevertheless is the fact that these people who earn this delta CS2, buyers in future, B2, they are not sitting there to make sure that their interests are properly taken into account. So this is a very abstract model, if you wish, so with general pi 1s, pi 2s, and f's. So if you want to have a look at actually the one of the exercises in last year's exam and its solution, you'll see actually this model worked out for a slightly more concrete example in which we have unit demand and a particular cost and particular change in a particular version of the delta the change in consumer surplus. So if you want to try out have a look at this exercise, last year exams exercise, you'll get an example essentially of this model, this BernheimWhinston model, at work to see how that will translate into a practical situation. So let's wrap up this lecture of today. So we have been looking at exclusive contracts, mainly exclusive contracts to make sure that customer foreclosure occurs, or in another word, the new entrant being foreclosed from getting access to retailers selling into the market. So these exclusive contracts, well, we do see them in practice, and one reason for that is, well, sometimes they are actually very efficient, so they might actually be giving incentives and thereby promote the behavior of making investments into, say, training. So that might be one efficiency rationale for these exclusive contracts. So by no means should we always ban such exclusive contracts. But we have to keep in mind that there are situations in which these exclusive contracts also might have some harm. They could be abusive, so they could be an instrument for exercising what we call exclusionary abuse. In particular, if this particular company that uses these contracts has market power, so is a dominant player. So in that case, they are abusive. They will keep entrants out in order to protect essentially monopoly positions that this monopolist, this incumbent, this dominant player already has in the market. So what are those theories of harm? Well, we do have to keep in mind this Chicago critique as always. So you cannot just narrow-mindedly say, well, we see exclusion here, and we see dominance, so this is probably a leverage of dominance. Well, that does not always hold water. So we have to have some slightly more sophisticated theory of harm, so a particular model that we have in mind. And the typical models that we have looked at here, which explain in what cases these exclusive contracts might be anti-competitive. We have been looking at external effects, essentially, of contracting. So somebody's rents, somebody who's not at the table at the time of negotiating these contracts, are being extracted here. So in the Young Bolton model, it were the rents from the entrant that were extracted, and there, in fact, we saw the entrant does enter the market. So exclusion is actually hopefully not taking place in that model, but the total surplus that the entrant gets is reduced by the presence of this contract with these damage for breach clauses. In the Rasmussen, Ramsey, Wiley, and Winston model, we saw there was some coordination problem where there was the need for scale, essentially. And essentially what happens if you are the monopolist, the incumbent player, you can play these various buyers. You can use essentially the coordination problems among these buyers and play them against each other in order to make sure that they each sign an exclusive contract, which in total is going to harm the whole collection of all buyers. And finally, in the BernheimWhinston model, it's the last model that we just discussed, we saw that actually there might be other buyers, perhaps in markets for other products or markets for the same product but in a future time period, who are not involved and cannot witness essentially and can particularly not make counter offers in this market for in this bidding for exclusive contracts, who actually pay the price of these exclusive contracts and who invalidate essentially the Chicago critique. So that's for today. So that was customer foreclosure. So next time we'll have a look actually at tying behavior, which again is related to this Microsoft case, to the US versus Microsoft case that we looked at here in BernheimWhinston. So again, read this paper by Whinston from 2004, which describes both this BernheimWhinston model and other perhaps exclusive contracts models, but also looks at the tying effect in this particular case, which also plays a role there. And obviously also we have a look at the tying models in the Reintegral document chapter that you have at your disposal. So see you next time.